Welcome, everyone. Wasn't that great? Let's clap for that.
Yes.
Sparkle fingers.
Well, listen, welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining me and my very special guests to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the classic Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, Carousel. And it's also a reunion for the two stars of the glorious 2018 production. Please say hello to Jessie Mueller, who played Julie Jordan, Joshua Henry, who played Billy Bigelow, and we are joined by the president of the Rodgers and Hammerstein Organization, Ted Chapin. Welcome, everybody. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Right.
Nice to be here. I'm trying to figure out how I look. Oh, Josh, am I looking at you?
Yeah, I think I'm looking at you now. All right. Oh, no, other side.
Oh.
That was really,
Yeah.
That was really exciting to go back and look at sort of this montage of that glorious production and Justin Peck's incredible choreography. I mean, what was it like for the three of you just watching that clip?
I got choked up. I got choked up mostly because I was like, I can't believe I learned that choreography. No, it was just hearing that music right at the beginning. Gosh, and it just took me to a place where, you know, it's right before my son was born. So many incredible memories doing that show.
I could watch them dance all day. And thank God they didn't make me dance. We have to tell Lindsay her dance speech made it in.
I'm text her right now.
Yeah, text her. I have the same thing. I was sitting there like this with a grin from ear to ear. Just that score just absolutely takes you away. It makes me so happy. Even with the amount of sort of sadness that is in the show, the score just like makes my heart burst in a good way.
Yeah.
I sat in one performance. Andy Einhorn, the conductor, invited me into the pit, which was just amazing to sit among that number of players. It was a pretty substantial number of players for Broadway, and just hear that music wash over me was really kind of amazing. Then when there was a gunshot, one of the players tapped me on the shoulder and said,
"Oh, good."
For the gunshot was great. It was great. But I love seeing that clip. And actually, you know, Justin was the first Broadway show Justin Peck did, and he was one of the instigators of this production. Actually, the idea of having him do a Broadway show, and he's really remarkable.
Well, first of all, how are you all and where are you all coming from? Because we have people watching from all over the world sitting here on Zoom watching you all. Where are you coming from and how are you?
Isn't that cool? Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's safe and healthy. I'm in New York. Josh, where are you?
I am also in New York.
And I'm in Connecticut. In a house that I escaped to when it became very clear that it was going to be work from home. And I'm very grateful for my two dogs because I can take them outside and they have to get walked every day no matter what's going on. So that gets me out and into the woods, which is just fine.
So what's a typical day like for everybody right now? I mean, we're beyond a month into all of this. I mean, was it easy to grasp a day changing into the next day? Have you added structure into your life? What's happening? Like, how do you deal day to day?
Well, for me, it was rough the first couple of weeks, especially because it was like 2 weeks more, and not knowing, you know, when things would get back to normal. And in the last, I'd say 2 weeks, I've started to add more structure. Literally, I'm like, I got a dry erase board and I'm thinking, I want to drink water. I want to drink 10 glasses of water today. So I just drink a glass and I'd mark it down. And I had to start going to bed at the same time every day just to get some sense of a new normal. I know especially as artists, like we get our highs off being in a room with people and collaborating, but that's not the case right now. So I'm having to just make little ways to give myself a whole new normal now.
Just for you.
Am I going to, it's weird, Josh. I feel like I had almost an opposite thing. I feel like I was having a much easier time at the beginning.
Yeah.
And maybe it was because we didn't really know what we were getting into and it felt like, okay, I can hit pause. I've hit pause before. I've been practicing hitting pause. That's sort of where I had been in my life. And it actually felt strangely easy at the beginning. And then after like second week, definitely third week, all of a sudden, then I was like really angry. I think I was angry because I was feeling, I'm so fortunate, but feeling the loss of structure, feeling the loss of a job and a sense of purpose. And also I think, Josh, the same frustration of like, well, I'm talking to people and I'm like, I didn't want to be on FaceTime with people for very long. I found it got me really aggravated, I think, because I knew subconsciously I'm not really connecting with this person. I can't really see, I can see their eyes, but I'm not, because I'm looking at the picture, not their eyeballs, which would be the camera. And I can't feel their energy. And I think that was really getting me down. I've also started to add more structure slowly, but also starting with really little things. Like you said, it's funny you said it, like making a list. What my therapist would call mastery. Like, it doesn't really matter what it is as long as you can cross it off. Like, your body is like, ooh, I did something good, endorphins. And then you literally feel better. It fuels you to feel like you can cross something off the list.
100%.
Yeah.
And I find that in the early morning, I mean, since we're so beholden to the internet and the computer, I find that my structure is I won't go on the office email until the office actually is supposed to open.
Good for
In the morning, I'm stupid enough
Yeah.
to look at the New York Times online, but then there are all kinds of Zoom meetings, whichever one of my hats I'm wearing, whether it's City Center or American Theater Wing, everybody's going through the same version of what are we going to do, meetings. Yeah. And then at the end of the day, it's like I turn it off. It's like now, I mean, the weird thing about watching the news is that it's like a car crash. You kind of are drawn to it and you want to pull away from it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And you want to be informed, but you know that too much is just not healthy. Right. Well, everybody's different. I should speak for myself. But
no Cuomo.
It's, just listen to his and
Oh, nice bottle, Jessie.
Yeah.
Thanks. It's not, is it backwards to you or is it the right way?
Oh, it's
Can you read it?
No, we get it the right way. When I first went on this, I thought everything was going to be backwards, but I think the audience sees everything the right way.
Okay.
What are you binge watching? Because I'm binge watching everything R&H. Seriously, I told Ted and all of you before we started, I did The Sound of Music, The King and I, Carousel, Oklahoma, State Fair, the Anne Margaret version.
Tell me more. This is like speaking my language. Yeah.
I mean, R&H, Julie Andrews plays in my house all the time. There's just something really soothing about R&H. I don't know what it is. Like when you feel down or whatever, even if it's a sad ballad, you get to feel such an emotional thing when you listen to it. Like, let's just talk about R&H and the influence that they've had on, like, getting people through this pandemic.
The song for me that has gotten me through is You'll Never Walk Alone. I recorded that. I put it on my Instagram a couple weeks ago, but in that moment in the show was so heavy, but it's like you said, it's got so much hope. And this is a moment where we just collectively, I think we've all not thrown our hands up, but we're like, okay, we don't see the end, we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And just that knowing that at some point, things will get better. You just have to keep walking. And I think, that song, You'll Never Walk Alone, just says that so perfectly. So that song has been really impactful for me at this time. And also,
people may think wrongly that the song is just about sort of the optimistic view of, we'll get it together. That song is full of the storms that you're going through.
I was going to say, look at the beginning lyric.
Because that makes it. I think that to Richie's point about R&H, they were so good at figuring out how to write things that have more resonance than you might think at first.
Yes, and it's not if you walk through a storm; it's when you walk through a storm. It's not this. It's like, well, this is going to happen, so here you go. And Josh, what you said, I think that's what's so brilliant about the show too. Is it was the phrase you just said. It was like when you're in it, you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I feel like that's what's happening to the characters in the show. And the beauty is that the audience gets to see the entire arc of somebody like Billy's life or Julie's life or Carrie and Enoch. And so the audience gets this insight into a life that the characters, while they're living it, never get. And that to me has always been the joy and the redemption and the beauty of that play and that story, because it's just this very deep and kind of epic look at life and what it's like to live life and go through life.
Yeah. Do you have a song, Jessie, that's sort of an R&H song that goes through your head during all of this?
When you were saying Julie Andrews, I turned on that the other day. It was funny because I think I asked, well, if I say her name, she might turn on, but to play like some Disney songs or something, and then Julie Andrews started to come on because do they own the rights to Sound of Music? I don't know, but anyway, then Julie Andrews started coming on, and so obviously so much of the stuff from Sound of Music.
Yeah.
I'm gonna think if there's another song specifically. Ted, do you have one?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, to your point, yes, actually, Disney bought 20th Century Fox, so they are.
And that's the connection.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
that's the connection there. It's funny because there's so often I have to listen or watch something on some purpose. I admire you, Richie, for watching the Anne Margaret State Fair. It's one of the my kids used to love Mystery Science Theater 3000, where they show really bad movies and comment on them. And I said, I wonder where I could suggest that version of State Fair. It's just so peculiar, directed by Jose Ferrer.
Yes. Guys, I didn't know this existed.
Oh, yeah. You will love this.
Is it all the same songs and stuff?
Rodgers wrote some new songs because it was after Hammerstein died, including one for Bobby Darin.
Yeah,
that great Rodgers and Hammerstein singer, Bobby Darin. But it's worth watching. Actually, I know DVDs are now almost a thing of the past, but that it is an extra on, I think, the most recent DVD of the original State Fair.
Check that out.
And they switched it to Texas. Go figure. Anyway, but it's not one of the more successful. It's interesting. Richard Rodgers in his autobiography never makes any reference to it at all.
At all. But I've always loved It Might As Well Be Spring. That was my jam for a long time.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
So, we're here to celebrate the 75th anniversary. I can't believe it's 75 years, Ted. I mean, that's amazing when you come to think about it.
We look great.
You look fabulous. Well, Time magazine called Carousel the best musical of the 20th century. I mean, I totally agree. Why do you think Carousel remains one of the most beloved musicals of all time?
Wow. I'll answer by saying that I think, having written Oklahoma, which was a surprise to everybody, because both Rodgers and Hart and Hammerstein with Jerome Kern were still writing, so that it was a one-off. Half of one team, half of the other team, and it had the effect on the theater that nobody expected. So I think to follow up that with something that is as deeply emotional and as rich as Carousel is kind of like them taking a step into, dare I say it, the world of opera. It's as far as they ever went. I mean, Rodgers always said it was the score of which he was the most proud, and I just think because they were. I mean, I keep reminding people that they were risk takers. Now that they've become classics, people think, oh, yes, we know what that is. But at that point, to do Carousel in 1945 on Broadway, pretty bold. Also, the other thing, a little statistic I love is they took the first row of seats out of the Majestic Theater so that they could put a 38-piece orchestra.
Yes.
When Phantom came in there, they took a jackhammer to the back wall to fit the set. But in these days, it was about the composer was strong enough to say, I want a lot of players, 22 players in the string section alone in the original.
It just makes you gasp in a good way.
Because I was going to ask you about that, Ted. I think Oklahoma had was it 25?
20, but somewhere between 25 and 30. I'm not sure exactly. And that was sort of standard Broadway musical orchestra in those days.
Mm-hmm.
But 38, can you imagine what that must have sounded like at the Majestic Theater? I mean, just like I said, the string section alone. But I mean, that was because of Richard Rodgers with the orchestrations and everything, he wanted to be heard, right?
Yeah, and he knew that he wanted his music to be presented on a really high level. It's interesting. There was a concert on Rodgers' Centennial in 2002. There was a concert at Carnegie Hall, and at the intermission, I ran into Alan Eisenberg, who ran Actors Equity, and he said to me, "What are those orchestrations that I'm hearing at Carnegie Hall?" And I said, "Alan, Once Upon a Time.
Yeah.
Because that's what they were. They were the original. And it's interesting because part of what was, I think, brilliant about the production that you guys were in is Jonathan Tunick reorchestrated it.
Yeah.
But he did it in so much in the proper style of what we would think, had Rodgers decided to do it in a more standard Broadway style. It was like Broadway of then. And it just, celebrates the music, and it had enough actually instruments that could honor what that music is.
Yeah. For Jess or for Josh, why you think this is one of the greatest musicals year after year, decade after decade?
I mean, the music is just phenomenal. Some of the best songs that have ever graced the stage. For me, I think it's the themes of redemption, of a second chance, which are often lost. I mean, now they're lost. That's something that we don't give a lot of the times, and I think that really resonates with folks. I'm a father now of a 2-year-old, and I've done things that I'm not proud of before Samson, and now I feel like I have an opportunity to just show him how to avoid those things, and so that's a big theme in the musical, and that's always resonant, and I think that's why this one, the way that it's said, the way that it's scored, is particularly so long lasting.
Jess,
Yeah.
for you.
Oh, is it my turn? A combo platter of both of their answers. The music is incredible. The characters are actually quite well written. I think, like Ted says, it's, now we know them as classic, and sometimes I think that comes across to a modern audience of, oh, that's from the 40s. That must be kind of shticky, or that must be kind of, and anytime I've gotten to work on this, it's like, you can do it that way, but you can keep digging, and there's more and more to find.
Yep.
And just the universality of the subject matter. It's about loving and life and learning and failing and forgiving and being forgiven. And it's about really, really, really big stuff that everybody can relate to.
Yeah.
And I think it is so well written that, people talk a lot about revivals and why revive something. It can withstand different interpretations. It can withstand bold casting choices. It just can, because the story is that universal, I think.
It's also, I think the relationship between the two of you is something, 15 minutes of the bench scene when we get to see the two of you connect. But it's one of the things I always explain to people about Carousel is that's a relationship that is so, we may as an audience look at it and say, these two are not right for each other. But it doesn't matter, because the two of you know profoundly, even if you talk about all the reasons why you shouldn't, you're scared of me. But the realization of just how deep that relationship is pretty extraordinary.
It is. And I feel, I don't know how you feel, Jessie, but that scene was one of the hardest scenes. I think probably the hardest scene I've ever been a part of.
I'm so confused
worked it
by it.
so many times. There's so many layers of knowing and of unknowing, and certainty and uncertainty. And I would say that have you ever worked a scene that much?
No, I don't
Between
think
me,
so.
You and Jack, we'd find a closet or just go to a restaurant or bodega, and we'd be working on that scene.
Yeah, he'd be like, let's unpack this more. And we were like, okay, but do I still sit on this line? And you know what I mean? It kind of got to the point where it's like, we were so happy to do it, and yet your actor brain is like, oh God, but there's people in there. But that's what I loved about Jack too. He was like, let's just make sure we've asked all the questions. Let's ask all the questions. And Ted, it's so fascinating what you said, because there are so many questions in that scene, and there's not a lot of information. You get sort of this description of what the carousel waltz is in the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you get this scene where, like, the ladies are running in. There's been a ruckus, and Billy comes in, and then it's like Billy and Julie meet, but you found out they've sort of met before. They sort of know each other. There's a lot of questions that you have to come up with answers to inform. And I think that was a lot of what we were discovering of like, okay, well, we get to come up with the answers to this. Which answers are going to serve us the most for where we know this play goes, and sort of what trajectory we want to take the audience on with us.
Yeah, you did it well. You did it so well.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, Jack is pretty brilliant. So
let's talk about Jack O'Brien. I mean, Jack O'Brien is one of the greatest directors, period. Anybody who's ever worked with Jack said they have learned more from doing a Jack O'Brien show than they have learned from any other director. And there are brilliant directors out there. So what was it like working with Jack O'Brien, and what made him so special? And what did you take away from that to make you better actors?
There were certain days, Josh, I just have to say this. There were certain days, I don't think he'll care, where he came in, because he would say it first, and we'd go, "You're yoga Jack today, aren't you?" And he'd be like, "Yeah, I did yoga this morning. Get ready. Sit at my feet." You know what I mean? Like, there's some wisdom coming at you. And it was true. I mean, he always had that, but also just his vocabulary. I had to start keeping a list of words he would say, and then I finally got to the point where I wasn't embarrassed anymore to say, "Jack, I don't know what that means. You're going to have to use a more like layman's term word for me." So at the end, I had this great like Jack O'Brien glossary that I came away with. So I loved that.
I think one of the things I love so much about Jack is he's so playful in the room. Yeah. Like he's just so like a kid in a candy store when it came to this material. Like with the bench scene, we never stopped asking these questions. And then this question meant we got to open up these other 20. But there was just this exuberance that, I mean, he's been around for so long and has done everything and worked with everyone. And I just guess I expected him to be very, very matter-of-factly and very scholarly about the whole thing. But he was so emotional and excited the entire time. Yeah. And I thought, well, you know what? When I grow up, if I'm, Andre DeShiel's age and still in this, like that's what I want to be in the room. I never want to feel like I got it all figured out, or I know what this technique is, or I know where this story's going. I always want to go down the darker trail with excitement, and that's what I take from Jack.
He was always like the most energetic person in the room.
Yeah,
always.
Funny. He's got a great sense of humor.
Oh, he's so funny and like a wicked sense of humor too. So good. But Jess, you said he's so wise. He's one of those directors that I think he's worked with so many people. He's done so many amazing shows, so many different kinds of shows, that he is the kind of the director that knows like he's going to say something to me on Monday and then like leave me alone for 3 days. Yeah. And then he's going to bring up the thing he wanted to dress on Monday, but I wasn't ready for it until Thursday. and he wouldn't do the same thing in the same way with Josh or Alex or Lindsay, or like it's almost like I think what I imagine being a good parent is, Josh. It's like, you have multiple children, like each kid is different and what each kid needs and when they need it and how they need it explained. And he's just so good at his job that he doesn't get like wrapped up in other things. Like he has the capacity to do that and be very wise with how he directs and how he directs each person.
Yeah, it was crazy to see him do that I remember one time he gave me a note and then he went to Renee and I just kind of like sat back and observed, and Renee and Brittany and you and just watching the process of how he deals with people differently. You're like, that would not have worked with me. That would not have resonated with me at all.
Right.
Yeah,
he sussed people out really well.
Jack, be nimble.
Because this was go ahead. You go ahead, Jess.
No, that was it. I said
that was it.
Nimble. Mm-hmm.
No, because the interesting thing there were so many firsts to this production of Carousel. I mean, everybody thought outside of the box, and Jack stripped this back to the script and then the score. I mean, Jess, you had done Carousel before, but you had a lunch with Jack O'Brien, didn't you, before you signed on?
Yeah, I did.
What was that lunch like, and what made you say, yes, I have to do this?
I think the thing that tipped it for me was Jack started talking about how he really wanted to address the spiritual nature of the play and the story. He felt that was something that in other productions maybe was glossed over a little bit or made sort of, for lack of a better word, kitschy. I don't mean that necessarily in a negative way from a design standpoint or whatever. And he just really felt like that was kind of the lens he wanted to take on it. At least that's what we talked about in the lunch. And I remember I almost started crying because I felt like that's always what's drawn me to the piece. And I've always felt a strange sort of deep connection to it. And so that was the thing that tipped the scale for me.
And Josh, for you, like I said, brilliant, both of you, the whole entire production, everybody in this production was brilliant. You were the first African-American to take on the role of Billy Bigelow. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's such a huge, daunting role. It's probably one of the biggest roles ever written for a male in the musical theater. What made you say yes? And was it daunting for you at any point during the process, this role?
Well, yes, to that second part. I will echo Jessie and say that what made me say yes was Jack's take on spirituality and what he wanted to bring to this. I mean, spirituality is a big part of my life. And you may hear Samson in the background agreeing. He's crying. But just diving into what really fuels us outside of our five senses. That is something that really appeals to me. And Jack was very serious about that. And, into the second part of your question, it was really difficult. Like, I didn't realize how difficult it was until I got out of it. Because at the time, my wife was about to have our first son, but I think fortunately, right before Carousel, I was doing Aaron Burr in Hamilton, which was a really demanding role as well. And so it was just back to back. So I think I just jumped into it, and I was in good, I guess, show shape emotionally and physically to do that. But it was massive. I just still remember the first read through of the first time I sang soliloquy in rehearsal, and everyone was like, it was well received, thankfully. And I was looking around like, oh, cool. Well. Like, that might be 3 a week, y'all. But
you're like, is this thing on?
You're like, I'm glad that everyone liked that. But it took me a while, and thanks to, of course, Jack and everyone in the production. I have to say, Andy Einhorn really helped me find vocally what I needed to get through that as well. So it was one of the most challenging things I've ever done. But those are the roles that I like. I like the ones that make you feel used up at the end of the night.
He's a good
and I'm
leader,
sure,
too.
yeah.
He's a great leader.
The soliloquy changed for you, I'm sure, during previews when your wife was still pregnant, and then your son was born during the run. So did the soliloquy change for you? Because I went back a few times to see the show.
The soliloquy changed. I remember. Woof! Wow, sorry, y'all. I remember the day after the day I sang soliloquy after Samson was born, and having to. I was like, do I shut out these real emotions? Do I use them, for this? And I don't even remember that performance. But the couple more after that, it started to take on a whole new meaning, because I was just singing to Samson, whether it was My Boy Bill or My Little Girl. It was all about what was going on at the end of the night when I would come home and see him just sleeping in the crib. And it's one of the wildest moments I've ever experienced in life. Like, actually what's happening in your life, reflecting what's going on stage.
And I'll say that the first time I was in the rehearsal room and saw a run through, the way you did soliloquy, I remember saying to you afterwards, "You're having a daughter." This whole thing is about my son, and you don't know how to deal with that. I mean, that switch that happens in the middle of colloquy, we all know it, it's there, but to have done it in such a way where you were totally convinced it was his son, and then, oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
Thumbs up, and this may not work out at all. That was really great. That also
Thank
said,
you.
You two are so articulate. I love actors who are as articulate as the two of you are. Congratulations.
Oh,
Thank you, Ted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you work on the play part first with Jack? How in the rehearsal room did you work on songs separately? How did you work on this?
like, what did we do?
Yeah.
One of the first things we tackled was the waltz.
Oh yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah.
I mean, that was really the first thing. We also, Scott Rudin gave us developmental workshop time, like more than I've ever had on anything, just to, and I think a lot of that really was focused on creating the movement, creating the vocabulary for that, and giving Justin the time to get in the room with people and a lot of dancers that he knew and had worked with, which was so cool to watch. But we worked on that. I feel like one lab was almost that. It was just the opening sequence of the play.
Yeah, there were so many questions in that opening sequence, and every day of that I don't think we looked at this. I mean, we looked at the script, but we didn't get into the script for one entire lab.
Yeah, I don't think we began scenes.
Yeah.
And then as we did, then Jack wanted to go back and make sure that sort of where we were headed, which, you know, he knew, he had a vision of what he wanted to do, but that was also, he knew there were things, he and Justin, that they wanted to cultivate or bring out in that prelude to just kind of make sure everything was intertwining, and then they had more information about what they wanted to pop out or bring back or whatever.
See, that's what's great about Scott Rudin. I mean, he gives you the time to really work on things. Like you said, who would have thought to have a lab just to work on the opening to sort of get how this whole thing is going to play out? That's brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ted, what has this been like for you? You've seen so many productions of Carousel. I mean, being there for this, I mean, so beautifully cast. I mean, just your thoughts on this.
Well, I wanted to go back to something that both you guys said, which is Andy Einhorn. People don't realize quite how important the role of a musical director is. There have been in conversations where, you know, we acknowledge the overall director of a musical, we acknowledge the person who directs the dancing, but then the director of the music is, I think, of equal value, and a lot of times people don't really understand that. And Andy is extraordinary, and you know, both helping actors find their way in, but also an innate sense of music, of the tempos, and you know, helping get the arrangements and orchestration. So just a shout out to Andy. From my standpoint, it's interesting that when I was first at R&H, Yul Brynner was on Broadway for the third time.
Oh, wow.
Fairly tatty production of The King and I, but it didn't matter. Everybody just came to see The King. Yeah. And I remember thinking, gee, I wonder if Broadway's ever going to be hospitable to seeing Rodgers and Hammerstein shows again. And I saw a production of Carousel, out of all places, the St. Bart's Playhouse on Park Avenue, a production of Carousel. And I thought to myself, this may be the one, because it is so rich and so dramatic, and maybe this is the one that we will see as the sort of the linchpin of getting people to reappreciate these shows. And the one that was done in London that came to Lincoln Center Theatre really was the beginning of a reappreciation of Rodgers and Hammerstein in that era of musicals. And that one was, it's interesting. I had other reasons to listen to the album of the London production when it was in London, and I thought the physical production was spectacular. And the singing's okay. It doesn't, frankly, have the personality that you guys brought to it. You know, and it's like, you know, the British are very, very good at theatricality, and you know, and that was Bob Crowley, one of the first sets that Bob Crowley did, and it was astonishing. Wow. But at the end of the day, I think we do the music part of this better than they do. Sorry. Yeah. So I think that's part of what was so amazing about this production, and having you guys and Renee Fleming. I remember when the idea of Renee came up. And somebody said, well, she'll never agree to do it. And I said, I'm not sure she won't, because she's sort of looking for a way to transition out of the straight opera world.
Yeah.
And I remember going in the theater at a tech rehearsal where there were all the plywood and the computers all over the theater. She was standing at the side, and I went over to say hello, and she just looked at it and said, I don't know how you do this.
It sounds like her. Yeah, well, you were talking about, I was going to say, we haven't talked about Renee yet. We've been talking about Andy Einhorn too. And Josh, you were kind of talking about, Andy guiding us through vocally. And I think one of the things I was concerned about, I talked to you about this, and a couple other folks were like, guys, we're in a play where we sing with Renee Fleming. Like, what is this going to be? Like, it's, and we were like, where's this going to live? Is it going to live in a high opera? Is it going to live somewhere in between that in musical theater? And I think Andy was super instrumental in kind of like helping us raise up to Renee. And, he didn't want to like bring Renee down to us, but also she was just so, I find her to be, she is so gracious, one of the most supportive people I've ever met. Yeah. And one of the just egoless. She'd come up to you on a break and be like, how are you? I remember her always going up to Lindsay, be like, Lindsay, how are you doing that? How are you placing that? Because you're like belting that. And I want to know. And I also love the day I walked into rehearsal and Renee had a cup of coffee, and it just made me feel better as a singer. Like, and I think she had cream in it too. And I was like, that's right. Live your life.
She's
so humble. She's so down to earth.
I was fortunate to have a dressing room right next to her.
God, that's
and, I'm not shy, like I've been like, how are you doing this? Like, how are you doing that? How am I, cause I lay right beneath her when she's saying, you'll never walk alone, just playing dead. And I'm like, just taking notes like, oh, okay. Ooh, no, that shines. So I just remember asking her all these vocal questions, and we would just have these conversations, and she was so candid and just so, oh yeah, this is what that is. What you're doing, a little bit more of that. It's a posture thing. And just so generous with her wealth of knowledge and experience.
I should have gone up there more. Yeah.
Because I remember talking to her opening night. She was so excited to be a part of a musical theater piece. I mean, she was so honored to be working with all of you and learning how the process of musical theater and Broadway works, because it's so different from opera. And she was so great just to be in all of your company. You were talking about...
We felt the same way about her.
Yeah. Well, I remember the Wednesday afternoon when you had your listening party, remember? When the CD, we were on the mezzanine level.
Yeah.
And some of us were invited just to come and be with all of you to listen to it. And I remember it was so wonderful to watch you all sitting on the steps, and Renee was there and everybody was there listening to this beautiful new recording of Carousel. Do you remember that afternoon between
and the whole
the
orchestra
matinee and the
there.
evening? Yeah. Everybody in your company came upstairs.
Yeah, we all ate dinner and listened. I love it when you get the opportunity to do that and listen to the people you made it with, and everybody gets excited about hearing, this part of that part, or it's you, I can hear you. You know what I mean? They popped your vocal there, and to listen with the orchestra too was really, really special, because that happened quick, and it was that was a big thing, and it was a labor of love, and I'm very glad that it exists.
It was one of the few times in the entire process that I feel like we were all together, not on stage.
Yes.
We were laying down on the ground, just kind of like we were at a campfire listening to this thing. And the whole process was so fast, over 9 months. And that was probably one of the only times we were all together.
All got together.
Orchestra,
I think you're right.
Cast together,
I have so many. I remember having so many interesting conversations with a lot of orchestra members that night. And we were talking about, isn't it kind of sad that we don't get to be more involved in what each other does? And someone might have an oboe line and it's this beautiful solo, and you got to talk to them about oh my gosh, I love that part when you play that, because here's what's happening on stage and it fuels me so much. And they might say, oh my God, I never knew that was happening. That's so cool. I'll use that. I'll do that more. I'll do that. The fact that we don't always get that exchange just because of time constraints or physical limitations, because we're in different spots at the same time, but it's just one of those other wonderful moments where you realize that like it takes a village, and when you like the villagers that are in your village, it's cool.
Ted, for you, listening to this beautiful recording of Carousel.
Oh, one of the weird things about Carousel is there are not a lot of great recordings of Carousel. One would think there would be. So this one is so vibrant and so alive and modern in a proper kind of way, I think. But it's also interesting you talk about that when the performance I sat in the pit. You're surrounded by all that wonderful music. The only time you hear anything is that there happens to be a very heavy dance number that's happening above you.
Yes.
I mean, it's the conductor is the conduit, because you can look up and see the conductor and he's seeing the stage, but
Sure.
it does feel like a completely other world. And it's just one of those weird things. You're all doing it together, but you seem to feel as if you're very, very separated.
Yeah.
It's a great recording. It's a great.
And especially like if your theater doesn't have a green room and stuff, like you said, Josh, you're not crossing paths as much. So It's nice to have those opportunities where you get to check in.
Yeah.
One of my, speaking of being in the pit, Ted, there's just one point where I had to go through the pit to make an entrance. And that was one of my favorite parts, because I would just be a goofball for like 2 minutes and be like, oh, yeah, harp, yeah. And then emerge.
Very serious.
But we just have a moment. It's nice to have those little checkpoints. As actors, we have them on stage all the time in the wings, but you don't have them with the orchestra. And just a little bit of appreciation, just locking eyes with some of the players down there, that meant a lot to me, and I felt more connected in the piece.
I should also wave the office flag by saying that Concord Music, that had bought the company that had bought Rodgers and Hammerstein, they're the ones who made the album, and it was a very big gesture for them to say, we are in this world. Buying the R&H thing put them in the Broadway world. They're now more in the Broadway world than they were then. But to stand up and say, we're going to make this album, I think was a great, great gesture for them, and ended up with a wonderful album.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Many people consider Carousel to be, if not the best score ever written, one of the best scores ever written. Was the score ever intimidating for either of the performers, for Jess or for Josh? What did you work the hardest on or the hardest to find? What was the most challenging for you part of the score?
Pretty
Josh.
Pretty intimidating. I'm going to go back to Andy, who really helped me find the sound. We had a lot of disagreements, which I think is great in the process of finding a piece. And mainly because, like Jessie said, I wasn't sure where to place this sound in my voice consistently. So I think finding one of the things that I struggled with was the vocal quality and the in songs, and then how I spoke, and there's something about the way these songs, you come into a song like If I Loved You, Julie Jordan, it's not a gradual thing. And so my biggest challenge was finding how I was speaking with how I was singing and marrying those two things so that when the song came about, that it would be a seamless transition. And that took me a while to find.
I would totally agree with that statement. Because I've always had this thing too of not taking it like too far, but like if someone has an accent when they talk, they have an accent when they say, like, it shouldn't sound like a different person, a character. You should just believe it's the same person talking and singing. And I had the same thing, Josh, because we were having all these conversations of like, okay, well, where does this live in terms of the grandness of the sound? Andy really wanted a grandness to the sound. He wanted this to live in a heightened place. And so, yes, it was definitely marrying that with the dialogue and yet feeling like it was funded. At that point, I hadn't done a ton of soprano stuff in a while, so I didn't feel as connected to that part of my voice. So for a very long time, we'd be working on something and he'd say, yes, that's the sound I want. And I'd be like, I don't feel connected to it. I don't feel my emotions aren't flowing through that sound yet. So it was really, because I had the same thing, Josh. I was like, I don't know if I buy this, man. I don't know if I agree with you. And we had a lot of really interesting conversations. And because I was like, I don't want this to sound I get that I want the heightened nature to be there, but I don't want it to sound disconnected emotionally. So it was a process of trying to find what that was for sure. If I Loved You for me has been a song I've been intimidated by for probably decades. And I remember, I just thought of this when we were rehearsing and we talked about how we work on the prologue. That was the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
For 20 minutes, working on the prologue on and on. And I just kept being like, yeah, let's work on the prologue. I was like, we don't need to work on If I Loved You. Let's just say that. We'll just do that like in the last week. That'll be great. Then I'll feel ready. And it was like this block for me. It was this roadblock. I don't know if like soliloquy was like that for you, Josh, or something. You have these ideas of what this is supposed to be. And it wasn't until we started working on it and it became a scene, truly.
Yeah.
Like once we had done the vocal work, and then when it became a scene, and I was like, okay, I know more about what I'm doing as Julie to your Billy, and like the information started to come together, and then I felt like I could kind of get inside of it. But it just, because it was so kind of epic to me.
Yeah.
That it wasn't personal.
100%. I think the biggest lesson that I learned, one of the biggest lessons, was how to serve a grand design in intimate moments.
Yes,
right?
That's a good way to put it.
That is the hardest thing, because performing loudly, especially having done some like contemporary work, like in a moment where you're this close from someone about to kiss or looking at the stars, feels a little strange. But that's probably one of the biggest things that Carousel taught me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Andy really didn't want us to rely on those mics.
No.
He really didn't, and I think that was a great thing. He really challenged us. Really challenged us to kind of like try something different. And I'm really glad we did. I think where we ended up was somewhere where people felt good about, and I felt like it was kind of a new place for all of us, honestly. So I think that was really cool.
Ted, what's your take on this, Ted? High five each other. I love this. The Broadway Brady
I'm
Bunch.
so bad at this. This is why I'm not a dancer. Dyslexia of movement. There we go.
There it is.
No, because Ted, this was their score that they wrote. This was, like you said, it's operatic. It's dialogue that goes right into song, goes back into dialogue again, and these two were flawless, as everybody else in this show was. What's your take on it?
Yeah, no. I mean, I love hearing the sort of the conversations that take the rest of us into what that process was, because I think it both shows how important the examination during rehearsal period of something that that should never be taken for granted, and as they both said, the layers that you can find when you keep doing it. So I love hearing that kind of stuff, and I also, it's funny hearing this sort of spiritual nature of the piece put me in mind of the fact that the piece on which this show is based, Lilium, the Hungarian play, it ends with the line, "Is it possible to have somebody hit you real hard and it not hurt at all?"
Yeah.
And then the mother character says, "Yes, that's possible for somebody to hit you real hard and it not hurt at all." And then the curtain comes down.
Wow, I'd forgotten that was the end of the play.
Yeah, that's the end of Lilium. And to Rodgers and Hammerstein's credit, that they thought, no, wait a minute, redemption. We can't let that happen. I also, it's funny, the production, I had a little revelation about the production, which I told Jack, and he was having none of it. But I said, interesting that's not really a person. Billy Bigelow at that point has come back from another world. So he's not a bona fide person like everybody else, on stage. He's something else. He's a ghost. It's something, he's not quite the same as everybody else. So perhaps what that point is that something that didn't feel like a hit made her think about something from the past. And it never occurred to me that, he's, the Starkeeper says you can go down to Earth for a day, but is that a complete reincarnation of the entire person, or is it something sort of not quite whole? Anyway, right. I thought of that.
No, I had that same thought. I'm glad you said that, Ted, because I had that same thought in rehearsals about just trying to unpack that part of the play, and we worked on that part of the play for quite a long time, because I think it's a part of the play that people have a really hard time. What is it? Accepting, coming to terms with, facing, extrapolate, like, but I think sometimes it's really, really good to face stuff that is difficult, and that's sort of what we do as artists, is we try to give you these characters that hopefully you can empathize with and say, well, here's how they did it, what would you do? But I think this I would ask Jack about that. I'd be like, well, what's the reality here? And he was like, Jess, quit asking me questions like that. You're right, he didn't want to go there. He because I was, trying to make sense of it in my mind. But yeah, but good writing, it can take that. It can take those layers of peeling the onion, like you said.
Yeah.
Josh, for you, the end of the show, like working on that when Billy comes back, what kind of questions did you have?
I mean, I had so many, but like Jess was saying, how do you know what being a spirit feels like? Like, what is that? I think that question was one of the things that attracted me so much to doing this with Jack. It was hard to find how I was supposed to then walk and move. Do I have the same feelings? Is there something that happens when Billy dies that changes him completely? We know that's not the case. There's like a gradual knowing that he has a realization that he has about how he's done some wrong things. And so the end of the show, though, as You'll Never Walk Alone gets reprised, this is going to sound funny, but it truly felt like ascension. It felt like, I'm there looking at the Star Keeper, or the, John Douglas, the Star Keeper, where he used to have the wings.
Yes.
But as those beautiful orchestrations are just soaring upward and upward with that empowering message of continue, just keep moving forward, was one of the most thrilling moments I've ever had on stage. And I had a lot of questions to Jack about, well, how do I move through this? And one time he told me, he was like, I don't know. And I don't think you know right now either. I think it's something you have to, one just feels their way through, like you're feeling in the dark. And, how's that for a note from your director, But it's true. That's how I had to find those last 10 minutes.
And I think there was a really cool choice that was made in the revival that we're talking about. That was like, I think it was Jack and Andy, the idea of having Billy sing a line in the reprise of You'll Never Walk Alone, because I think really in the script, it gives you the idea that there is this moment that happens, right? And then it's written in that Billy has the lines of, I loved you, know that I loved you. And then I think it's written in the script, I believe, that then you see Louise stand or something like that. So you realize that a change has occurred, but it seems like it's a little bit dealer's choice as far as how you want to communicate that change has occurred, that redemption has happened. So I think that was a big moment as a production that we had to kind of suss out. And I think musically adding that moment for Billy to sing, I think seemed really, really helpful. That seemed like a good choice and a choice that was in our arsenal to use. And then everybody seemed, okayed it. And I think that was something that was really cool and unusual about this production.
I agree.
Because as I'm sitting here, I've had goosebumps just listening to all of you talk about the end of the show, because it was so cathartic for me to sit through. I was bawling my eyes out at the end. By the time that curtain comes down, you're just crying, and then you just stand up when you all come out for your bows. I mean, the greatest thing about R&H musicals are they don't give you answers, they ask you questions. And I always walk away from an R&H musical learning something about the human condition. I feel so much smarter when I walk away from one of their shows. And even going back, watching them all over this past month, I feel so much smarter about, let me read about this. Let me read about that. Oh, I didn't realize they wrote about this then. And like Ted, you said earlier, they wrote about this stuff in the 40s and 50s. I mean, people aren't even tackling these issues now, and they tackled it then.
Yeah.
Do you all agree
at
that,
least asking the questions, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like, Ted, was this something that you told us about? I remember listening to or reading an article that was so brilliant. I thought about analyzing the character of Billy Bigelow from the sort of the worldview of when it was written as soldiers coming back from war and men who were displaced and who weren't a part of society and didn't have the right language and were sort of given tools to do what they were supposed to do overseas and then had to come back home and felt like they didn't have the vocabulary to live their lives anymore. And to me, that was like, well, yeah, that's that's going on in this story.
Yes.
I don't, do you know which?
I don't know specifically, but certainly the whole notion of it opening in 1945. It actually, I was looking at something a week or so ago that FDR died like the week that Carousel opened.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was going on in the country and in the world, the timing of Carousel, I guess, just underscored the emotions that's in the piece. People had, there were people who were dying.
Yes.
So it's kind of amazing the way, 2 shows later, South Pacific was kind of post-war, and part of what I've always has fascinated me about the South Pacific, and I'm not sure that Rodgers and Hammerstein did this intentionally. I think they just took stories and just dove in. But in South Pacific, I think part of it is saying to the audience, here's what World War II was and what we've just been through. Now we're going to enter into a period where the notion of racism is going to come in, and okay, welcome 1950s, here we go, because it's very much in there. But it's it's that's what the 50s was a lot about.
Yeah.
But I think they were theater animals. Their instinct together about how to create stories. Mostly, I would say, when the story existed before, they were not at their best when they had to do original stuff. But boy, they knew. Give them some characters and situations. But boy, were they good at going in and doing a little this and a little that and really deep. It's interesting. Todd Purdom wrote a wonderful book about R&H that came out just about the time of your show. Pointed out that in the first draft, it's a good book. In the first draft of Carousel, when Billy Bigelow dies, he's brought into a parlor, like a New England parlor, where there's a sampler on the wall so you never walk alone. But in this parlor are 2 people, a man and a woman, who are kind of Mr. and Mrs. God. Not a terribly good idea. But in the dialogue, and Todd quotes this, Billy Bigelow points to her and says, "Who's that?" And the Mr. God says, "What did you expect? Only men up here?"
Whoa.
And then Billy says, "Oh, excuse me, ma'am." And it's like, wow. So, his constant sort of women, how am I going to deal with women? In the first draft was there. They just got rid of the parlor, got rid of the whole thing, did the A-frame ladder and the Star Keeper hanging up stars, and just got rid of that whole point. But the fact that was an initial instinct was to deal with that once Billy Bigelow was up there too. How are you going to deal with women?
Wow.
Well, Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote great women roles.
Yeah.
They wrote amazing, complex women at a time when I don't think women were encouraged to be complex.
Yeah.
And
Beautifully put. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons I've always loved their stuff, even though I didn't know that that's maybe what drew me to it. But it's certainly what excites me about it now.
Yeah. We are just about out of time. I could talk to you all for like 4 hours here listening to absolutely everything. But what I want to ask you finally, if you could sum up the best part of the experience of working on your production of Carousel, what comes to mind?
Circle. Josh, you know what I mean by circle, right?
Oh, yes. Oh gosh, I have to completely agree with you.
It's just the first thing that popped into my mind.
So I don't know if you want to explain, but
no, go for it.
Before every show, we would get together backstage.
Every
show, not like night shows. Every matinee, every single show.
Also because Joshua Henry started it.
Well, I'm not the one for this production, but that was given to me in another production. But
it's not the concept.
If Come Rain or Shine, we would circle up before the show, and we would just really connect. We would take time to look at each other's eyes and be grateful for an opportunity to tell such an incredible story, to be involved with such an incredible classic with some of the most talented people in the world from so many different walks of life. And I think just taking that time to circle up before telling this epic masterpiece made it feel so alive, each and every performance, and when we're tired, when I was tired, whenever we were all feeling it, it's just, that's what gave you a little bit of extra juice, the connection from the circle.
It was an exceptional group. And then you'd usually pick someone. You pick someone in the group. You just kind of eye people out, and you pick someone, and you say, "What's the word of the day?"
Oh, yeah. And
they'd give you the word, and then will we all repeat it or something? Or I forget. That's terrible that I forgot. But it'll come to me later. But it was cool because it kind of let you know where that person was. But then you were like, okay, how does that apply to me today?
Yeah.
And then we went forward. It's very grounding.
Ted, for you.
Well, that's kind of amazing to hear that. For me, it's seeing this piece take its proper place on the Broadway 2 years ago was great. And also probably most important was the combination of friends that I had and friends that I've made from this production. Because it turned out to be kind of an extraordinary group of people, from Justin and Jack to you guys, Lindsay and Renee. I mean, it was amazing group of people, and theater's a community, and if that community continues to grow, then I think we'll be in good shape.
Beautiful. This was so extra special. I mean, the 75th anniversary that I got the three of you to sit here. There are fans all around the world at Broadway World that have been so excited to tune in about this because everybody loves RNH. Everybody loves Josh and Jess and Ted. You're the smartest man in any room any of us ever enter into, just so you know that. We could all say that. And I want to thank our audience who watches this, and if you're ever thinking of donating anything, or audience that's out there, you can donate to the Actors Fund, but of course there's BroadwayCares.org, because this is normally the 6 weeks that Broadway Cares would raise their 6 weeks of fundraising. You've all raised so much money for Broadway Cares, and they usually raise the red bucket during this time period where they would raise over $6 million that they would give back to the community, and they don't have that, but they have an online COVID-19 Emergency Assistance Fund online where they have raised well over $2 million, which they have already donated to the Actors Fund. And I know the number has gone beyond that, but I want to thank you guys seriously for doing this today. I've loved you all from the first day you've come to New York, like Jessie from On a Clear Day, Josh, all your shows early on. Like I said, Ted, I've always read your books. So I thank you for doing this today. I love you all. And like I said, everybody stay safe, wash your hands, and Broadway will be back bigger than ever. And I and all of us will all be there to celebrate together.
Thank you so much.
This was amazing.
Pleasure and honor.
Take care.
Thanks so much.